Later this afternoon, we might learn more about what Britain's departure from the EU would look like. A press conference in Brussels will mark the end of the second round of negotiations between British and EU officials. Last week, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson warned that the EU could go whistle if it expected Britain to pay an extortionate divorce bill. "I'm not hearing any whistling, just a clock ticking," the EU's chief negotiator responded. So, how have this week's talks gone? Adam Fleming has been doing his best to find out.
It started with the bungle over bundles. The British Brexit Secretary, David Davis, made a flying visit to Brussels to kickstart this round of talks. He was pictured sitting opposite his opposite number, the EU chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. In front of the European side, thick, luxurious piles of paperwork, rich with detail. On the British side, nothing. A newspaper pointed out that Mr. Davis's team had just one notebook between them, and it was closed. Civil servants who've spent a year preparing for these negotiations were hurt by the accusation that they hadn't done their homework. Of course, it was ridiculous obsessing over a photograph, but those of us covering the talks don't have much more to go on. We are kept far from the real action, which involves 98 British officials and an EU task force half that size. They meet in small subgroups. One is hammering out a compromise over the rights of EU citizens living in the UK after Brexit and British people living elsewhere. Another is holding what sounds a bit like a university seminar on the last century of Anglo-Irish relations as they work out what to do with the border. A bunch of economists go to and fro over the legal basis for the EU's demand that the UK settle its outstanding financial obligations, a sum that could reach €100 billion. They're having so much fun arguing over things like the French accounting method reste à liquider and the difference between the EDF and the EIB that on day one they even worked through their coffee breaks. We hacks hang around a lot, sometimes inside the European Commission headquarters called the Burley-Mont, sometimes outside. The neighbourhood is tiny, the press pack small, and so you see the same faces a lot. There's a reporter for a newswire chatting to someone from a member state that's considered a UK ally. There's the deputy spokeswoman for the UK delegation having an ice cream with Mr. Barnier's spokesman. Is that allowed? I see the grey minibus that ferries around the British team and think about following it. Is this what my boss meant by using shoe leather to get the story? Then a message comes. A representative from one side, I won't say which, wants to update us. In the pub. Do I drink water or beer? What if I accidentally get drunk and miss the story? I needn't have worried, because there's not much to say, and we end up asking fatuous questions. Are there any bonding events planned so that the two sides can get to know each other? No, they won't be going paintballing. What if officials fall in love over the negotiating table? Asks James from the Telegraph. Good to see he's following in the footsteps of his predecessor in that job, Boris Johnson. The Foreign Secretary made a guest appearance on Monday. He was attending an unrelated meeting just round the corner. When he arrived, we shouted some cheeky questions to him, whether he'd whistle for us, or if he'd been briefing against his cabinet colleagues. But he stuck to his script about sanctions on Syria. In the margins of the meeting, he discussed tariff-free trade on licorice and Lego with his Danish counterpart. And North Korea, said the woman from the Foreign Office, as if trying to get us to report some of the other important things happening in the world right now. As regular as clockwork comes the European Commission's midday briefing. At last, something that's on camera and on the record. The chief spokesman, Margaritas Schinas, has ruled that the press room will be a zone of only limited Brexit. There's an unspoken pact amongst the Brits that will let journalists from other countries ask their questions first. Then we try every trick in the book to find out some answers to our own. Margaritas mostly refuses to comment, but he can't resist the odd dig, telling us that Brexit is like a divorce and he has a very good lawyer in the shape of Mr. Barnier. I bumped into him in the street last week and we had a little chat. I didn't mention that my phone buzzes every single time that he tweets, or that I've watched so many photo ops happen in his office that I've kind of memorised the pictures on his wall. Up until now, Mr. Barnier has looked like the one in control, with his big pile of papers and the 27 countries who have his back. Yes, that has made him look like he's setting the pace, but it could end up being a straitjacket that limits his room for manoeuvre, and the Brits whisper that there are holes in his argument. Or is that just a bit of wishful thinking scribbled in a notebook?